technology companies, including platform behemoths like the one Mr. Eric Schmidt used to work at, as well as manufacturing leaders, such as the ones represented on today's panel today. Both groups are grappling with a fast-moving and increasingly challenging geopolitical landscape. A key feature of this global shift is that governments' national interests are interfering, if not clashing, with global companies' ambitions around the world. In the past, technology leaders enjoy fairly unfettered access to investors, data, supply chain partners, as well as customers. Now they are facing new constraints as where they can get these resources. For example, on funding, US and multiple European states have significantly tightened their investment review mechanisms while offering financial support or take stakes in domestic technology companies. On supply chain and customers, the Biden administration has legalized and in some cases reinforced Trump administration's undermined restrictions to cut off critical technology supplies to Chinese national champions, which undermine domestic vendors' ability to sell to Chinese customers. On data, Russia and China, among other countries, have treated as a new strategic resources and decide to restrict outbound flow of such digital assets to other countries. With this backdrop in mind, I would like to raise the first question to the panelists today. How do we understand this trend of interventionalist government approach to tech sector, and how would they affect Japanese companies' operation domestically as well as internationally? Maybe Kimura-san, would you like to address this question first?
Sure, Xiaoming, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in front of all of you. So I know this panel has a lot to talk, so I'll be brief and short. Let me start with a simple kind of way of seeing the things. For 50 years after the Second World War, there was, I think, 3 golden rules for the success of businesses: globalization, technological advancement, and financial measurement. Now, the globalization, the simplistic globalization, actually brought about the divisions amongst the countries or societies. And on that second technology, I mean, the shift or evolution from analog to digital was actually huge. But digital made the use of technology much easier, which led, I think, to the dual use of the technologies for both civilian purposes and the military purposes. And thirdly, people nowadays care much more beyond the financial measurement of the financial results of revenue or profit or trade volume, etc. But, I mean, data or the cyber intelligence and other intangibles are getting more important, more relevant in the current society. So I think that's how the things have been evolving so far. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. I don't know if other panelists would add to that experience. Maybe Koshiba-san, would you like to offer some comment?
Oh, thank you. I just realized our surname starts with a K. So we have 5 Ks here, as opposed to 5 Is. So hopefully we can now, give you some intelligent, opinions. But really, talking about the supply chain issues and issue of national economic securities, I think really those kind of issues are overstated, exaggerated by media or some of the analysts. In reality, if you look at the recent statistics of export-imports between US, China, Japan, and China, really total imports and exports remain unchanged. As a matter of fact, here in Japan, auto industries import more from China than before. So therefore, really, whether it is interventionist approach or not, I don't know. Really, that issue of supply chain, in the context of geoeconomical issue aspect is a little bit different. But with that said, certainly that some of the technologies, they are very sensitive. As mentioned in the new form of capitalism, which is Mr. Kishida's initiative, he specifically mentioned the quantum, AI, biologies. Those are really key technologies to alter the society and promote, growth. And also that eventually, you can really capture some security being essential to the global economy. So those are the kind of areas, we certainly see some regulations and restrictions. But also at the same time, as Mr. Kishida in the video message that Japanese government is ready to offer something like a 1.5 trillion yen, $1 trillion to promote green transformation. So I think really Japanese companies, and also the company in Japan, we should leverage such offers. I don't know whether it's going to be a subsidies or loans, and I don't know yet. But the thing is that there's a big chance, for Japanese companies to transform, also the Japanese society to transform right now.
Would you like to comment?
I think your point is extremely well taken because, oh my God, the world is ending. Well, no, it's not. The problem is it hasn't yet begun in the sense of that we sense that there is technological breakthroughs coming. We sense that quantum computing will be a massive game changer. We sense that AI technology will, bring about a better world and, solve a lot of problems. But right now, the actual concrete results are not very tangible. And that's where the role of the government, and particularly the coordination of the Japanese government with its biggest ally, the United States, is so important because now as industry, as innovators, and as researchers, and as investors, we need guideposts because the solution is not going to happen in the next 6 months. The solution is going to come at some point over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So I need to know that the government has my back, that it actually, as an investor, that it actually covers, some of the extra risks that I'm taking in order to bring about that these technological aspirations, what we are sensing, that actually turns into reality. So I think it's very, very important, to actually have this re-emergence of industrial policy is actually a good thing in the sense that it gives us yardsticks, guideposts, and yes, money is going to be behind it.
And if I can, maybe I will push back on that point a little bit. I think the sense you're talking about, it's very, very important in a way in certain technology sector. But we should also be aware of potential downfalls of this type of sense. What if we are not exactly right about our 6 senses? For example, Mr. Eric Schmidt talked about a great deal about AI's potential, but what if, for example, autonomous cars and flying taxis is not going to materialize in the next 1 to 3 years? What if it takes 5 or 10 or 50 years to happen in the marketplace? How do we balance this government guidance at the same time as a commercial forces playing out in the market that may be very unpredictable at some point? How do we find the overlap between the two?
You want me to answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Look, I think there are always very good concerns, right?
Yeah.
But the key question is, how do I bring about this innovation, right? And what we do know is just government directive is not going to do it. And so the government establishing the sandbox, encouraging both industry as well as the deep technology, the scientific community to actually cooperate in between. Because all the interesting breakthroughs don't happen in the area of physics or in the area of chemistry or even in the area of mathematics. The interesting breakthroughs are all happening in the space in between. And so that breaking down of the silos, allowing that mingling, that is going to be your biggest safeguard. We're not talking about entering a war economy where you say, I need you, JSR, to focus just on building logistics for tanks. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a playing field, a marketplace for ideas, a marketplace for innovations. And that's quite frankly where actually the Japanese government is in an excellent position to actually become one of the emerging superstars, because the government is committed. Correct me if I'm wrong, Minister. Is committed to free up 150 trillion yen. That's 30% of Japan's GDP. That's coming to you and me next year.
And Kanbi-san, you have
next year.
some comments to offer.
Probably I should talk about some kind of the geopolitical issue, how it impacts my business companies. But before that, because you talked about the relationship between the private sector and the government. So I'd like to just say one thing. When Mr. Kono was a minister of reform of the policy, we are very much thanks to your strong leadership to deregulate relevant policy in renewable energy in Japan. Sony was one of the kind of the user of renewable energy. At that time, we are really a bit struggled how we could expand our usage of the renewable policy. And there are a lot of the issues in Japan about renewable energy kind of the related policy and regulation that are so complicated. And thanks to his leadership, the apparently renewable energy kind of supply are expanding. So that's something, a good example, how the government could really support. And that is one thing. And in terms of the geopolitical, Sony is operating a diverse range of the business globally, from consumer electronics to entertainment and semiconductors. Most of these businesses are really affected by geopolitical landscape. And security and national policy related to China have apparently major impact, especially on our semiconductor supply as well as semiconductor procurement. And Sony, as for semiconductor, Sony is almost $10 billion supplier. At the same time, we are $7 billion purchaser. On the supply side, Sony is a world #1 manufacturer of so-called CMOS image sensor, which current main application is in smartphones or digital cameras. But in the future, we expect IoT applications and automotive applications are really growing. And so we are manufacturing most part of image sensor at our factories in Japan using our own proprietary technologies. And main customers are US-based smartphone companies or Asian-based smartphone companies. So since the most applications are consumer B2C application, we had thought that this business is less relevant from security issue. However, the US government sanctions on certain Chinese company 2 years ago had a great impact on this business. And at the same time, in the sensor business, we are procuring a logic chip to integrate with our own sensor from Taiwanese foundry companies or other foundry companies, including TSMC. And so apparently current or shortage of the semiconductor had a big problem for this business over the years. And so this is apparently part of due to the geopolitical issues. So this is a reason why we decided to participate and support TSMC's setting up of the factory in Kyushu, Kumamoto, with a strong support of Japanese government and so invitations. And I think that this TSMC's setup of new foundry company in Kyushu is a good example of government and private sector collaborations. And we are privileged to participate and support this effort. But at the same time, if we look at from a bit different angle, historically or until recently, we could purchase logic chip just through commercial transactions. But now, we have to really, in order to secure a stable supply, we need to really make such a special arrangement involving our capital investment. So that's really the apparently difference. And logic chip manufacturing is not necessarily our core business. So that's a kind of the challenge we still have about current geopolitical issues.
Thank you for the example of Sony's challenges in the geopolitical context. And my next question will be for Mr. Kono. We are moving from semiconductor to data. Given how Japanese companies are trying to maintain their place and expand overseas, how do you see Japanese government help them navigate these geopolitical challenges? Particularly, maybe you could speak on the help government can offer companies to overcome barriers to data movement around the world.
Thank you. Well, the late Prime Minister Abe proposed DFFT, Data Free Flow with Trust, at the G20 Osaka Summit. And next year, we are hosting G7 in Japan. So DFFT is one of the major topics that we are trying to bring about in G7. Unfortunately, each country have a different data governing rules. Europe has GDPR. US is, US is got 50 different state rules, and China, everything controlled by their government. So I think we need to honor each country's rule, but first step would be to make those transparent. We need to let the world know which country has which rule. And then we need to start accumulating some successful use case for data transfer. Like last year, we did the vaccine certificate, which can be transferable among the nations. So in order to create a new clear rules or new clear governance, I think we need, first step is to make transparent and then accumulate the use case. And then we'll need to sit down and merge what we can merge. So that's what we are trying to do, and Japan is very much willing to take leadership on this field. Number two, we are now talking about economic security strategy. And it is very important to draw a very clear, laser-sharp line. And this side is off, but this side is on. We have to make sure the business community know where the line is. In the previous time, the line was quite vague. And even if it's outside of the line, you know, if the rule doesn't apply to here, but there's some atmosphere created by something, so the business community may not be willing to do this because if they do it, they may be criticized by somebody. So we need to avoid it. So the government need to make sure the rule is laser sharp. And if it's inside, you cannot do it. But if it's 1 millimeter outside of the line, you should go get it. And that's something we need to make sure. Thirdly, I think we need to help produce more IT engineers, data scientists. If you go to many of the American university, it doesn't matter what is your major is. The computer science 101 is required to graduate. But here in Japan, if you're in the middle of the high school, you have to choose if you're going to go to science or non-science. And if you take non-science, you never learn computer science or math, and you can graduate out of the college. And I think we need to make some changes in the education system. So that's something we need to do.
If I can follow up on your first comment on the data free flow with trust, everyone here have heard that Japan is hosting G7 summit next year. In the past few years, between G20, G7, OECD, multiple working groups around data have made incremental progress on this exact topic, like the comparative study project you mentioned. That's a very good starting point. And this year's G20 statement also included ambitious goals, including potential exploration of privacy protection technology, as well as potentially, I think a very ambitious element is for the EU to give maybe all G7 companies a adequacy decision. That's a very, very aggressive plan, I think. What's your plan for G7 in terms of pushing more progress on the data free flow with trust topic?
Well, honestly speaking, it is much easier to deal with G7 than G20. It is almost impossible to get anything done in G20 today. So I'm fairly optimistic about G7 next year. And I think we need to create some kind of examples there and slowly expand to entire Europe or Quad or like-minded country. So that's what we are trying to do. And we are trying to talk to ASEAN countries, African countries, the countries of Middle East. I have met several ministers who came for yesterday in Tokyo. So we are trying to expand our strategy into those fields as well.
Next question, I would like to shift that to direct to the business representatives on the panel. What's your advice for Japanese companies to trying to navigate this complex global business environment? What are the pitfalls you would avoid them, suggest them to avoid?
Me?
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, really, it is true that we have a lot more boundary conditions. We used to work on cost and efficiency, but not anymore. Geopolitics, geoeconomy, and resilience, sustainability, or human rights. There are a lot of boundary conditions we have to meet. So, really, corporate management do have to learn, all the important boundary conditions. But I think really this is a pitfall question. This is a kind of tricky question, right? I think what I'm afraid most. I'm afraid of most is that extraterritorial nature of U.S. and China exports. Certainly that Mr. Kono talking about clear-cut, laser-cut, boundary between yes, what you can do, here you cannot do, but. Most of the countries, they do have some strategic ambiguity, between what you can do, what you cannot do, right? Because especially that, for the future technologies, you don't know what's coming up. So it's almost impossible to draw the line. And, but still that U.S., export control, this is extraterritorial, bindings, right? If you violate, you're going to go to jail. You are subject to the criminal charges. So those are the kind of sensitivities we have to have.
Great advice. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, if you look at the macro economy, sort of, I mean, companies are the source of value creation. And for the sustainable value creation, trust is actually the key. And so in this kind of environment, I mean, the CEOs should put the same weight on the questions such as, what would be the reactions of this company's decision amongst the supply chains, amongst the shareholders, employees, and so on. That's one side. But the other side is how and when I should communicate, companies should communicate and disclose those decisions in order to avoid and mitigate the risks. And that, for that kind of transparency is actually strongly required in the current environment. Now, clear rules will definitely help to make that kind of decision, and transparency is clearly the key for the trust. Now, there is a strategic decision comes in. I mean, transparency in the sense of just following the rules in order for the sake of the compliance is a small piece, actually. There should be strategic decisions, what to communicate, how to communicate, when to communicate. That kind of strategic decision is getting more and more important these days.
Thank you for that advice. Also, I would like to address the question of business community's advice for government. Post-World War II, Japan has very successful industrial policy that nurtured a group of world-class technology leaders. I wonder what the panelists today would say the Japanese government should learn from that experience.
Just if I can chime in here and kick things off, I think that Japan was fantastic at mobilizing and at achieving the goal of catching up to America. Absolutely spectacular. We're at a very different stage. We need a different type of innovation, a different type of motivation. And the one big advice that I would have for the government is that the collaboration between the universities, between the deep science, the actual scientists doing the scientific work, and industry, and yes, as well as the Japanese military and the Japanese police. For example, we talk about cybersecurity. It's very, very sad to see that Japan is one of the very few countries, very different from my home country, Germany, where the collaboration between universities, the top scientists, and the government and industry is actually not working very smoothly. So changing the governance there, I know that there's a historic legacy because we don't want to repeat what happened in the 1930s. That's all perfectly fine. But look at the models of governance that actually allow dual use technology. Because you look at something, we talked about quantum computing, which is still far out there. Right? But there is no question that it will be immediately of dual use, both for enterprises as well as for the military and strategic aspect. And so these demarcations, the governance around that, and please, Japanese government, please, Japanese universities, work out a better system of governance so that you can actually work towards one team, one dream.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we often talk about a lost decade or lost 3 decades, right? And I'm telling government, don't look back, right? Because I'm a strong believer of a long-term cycle. And Ian Bremmer started talking about the geopolitical recession in 2017, while order is changing. And Ray Dalio, he's one of the the founder of the largest hedge fund in the US. He studied 500 years to really try to study hegemony really starting, changing from Holland, British, then US, now that China is on the rise. And also George Friedman, one of my favorite geopoliticians, he's talking about two long-time cycle in the US. One thing which is clear, we are in the middle of the downturn. We are in the bottom. And during the transition, it's going to take about 10, 15 years before we start seeing a new trend, new cycle. So it really, today, it's chaos, but the good day is going to come. Possibly in the end of the 2020s, close to 2030. So this is going to be another 50-year cycle. And this cycle will be driven by technology. So really, to the government, I'm saying that just forget about the past. This is a new opportunity. This is maybe once in your lifetime opportunity for corporations and the country to revive this country with the technology. Possibly, I do think this is quantum technologies.
Go ahead.
Europe and the United States deregulated the economy and promoted the competition. And there was a little failure in that. There was something bad in it. So they sometimes try to come back. Here in Japan, we didn't do that. We deregulated the economy just a little bit. But there's a whole bunch of regulations still left in the economy preventing company to do whatever they want to do. But people look at Europe and people look at the United States, or look at it, they deregulated and they failed and they are coming back, so we don't have to do this. And that's a big lie. And I think we need to catch up. We are probably way behind. And we need to deregulate the economy. We need to give freedom to industries and let them compete. And in competition, there will be winners and the losers. But if there are winners, there have to be losers. But they are not bad guys. They simply lost the game. So they can and they should be able to return to the next round. And that's what we need to do. And government has been telling industry what to do, or more likely what not to do. And we still have so many regulations. We have so many rules, like telling industry, okay, you have to submit this application in floppy disk. And legacy remains. So we really need to get rid of those rules and let industry run freely. And they're going to be competition. They're going to be winners and losers. But that would make the Japanese economy more dynamic. And we should not be afraid of that. It's nice to protect everyone. But if you try to protect everyone, there are going to be no losers. And that means there are going to be no winners. And the economy will not leapfrog. So let's not be afraid of competition. And let's not be afraid of making losers, because if there are losers, there are going to be more winners. And that's what we need to do.
That's a very refreshing comment, given there's a global antitrust wave against the big technology companies these days. I'm glad you are talking about deregulation and letting go those band-aids and get rid of bureaucratic procedures in this day and age. As someone sitting in the geotechnology practice, working with a lot of geotechnology companies around the world, I think that's music to their ears.
Yeah.
But can be some, go ahead.
Minister's word is very much encouraging to tech companies. And considering the size of the Japanese market, I think that it is critically important for Japan, the Japanese company, maybe to remain free trade intact. Of course, we are prepared to accept and acknowledge about the need of certain new regimes relating to security issues. However, I think that corporate activity should not be too much over-regulated. And in that respect, I like to say 3 points. One is a kind of the clear distinction between the technologies or product which are really relevant to national security issues, and those are not. And the second one is let the trade and activities of corporations among the so-called like-minded countries to be as much as possible free. And the third one is that the law and policy of the government is hoped to be consistent and predictable. So the companies are always trying to accommodate our activities based on the policy and regulations. But if the policy or regulation frequently change, it's really difficult. So long-term perspective are really, I think, that important.
Go ahead.
I think working together between the public and private sectors is getting more and more important. So in one aspect, I mean, deregulation will definitely help, and competition will, sort of accelerate the innovation in one sense. But, I mean, as Kame-san mentioned, I mean, there are areas where, the businesses need the government support, government help, and we have to work together. We at PwC actually seeing many more opportunities work together, both public and private sectors. And in the geotech era, I would hope that this kind of working together will actually increase and deepen so that we can mutually make the strategic decisions to properly navigate this complex GZERO environment.
I want to pick up on one of Koshiba-san's point, because these technological breakthroughs. So how does this actually happen, right? And I don't know how innovation happens, right? But definitely you need to empower the young, right? If you look at Nobel Prizes, I think all of you know that basically the work done in the deep sciences, what that actually wins you the Nobel Prize, is all done in your late teens or early 20s. Right? And then, now this is a tate shakai, right? This is and the older I get, the more I love the seniority-based system in Japan, right? But the reality is that, empowering the young, right? And Minister, you work at the digital agency, you lead the digital agency. You know very well, software engineering, if you graduated from Stanford or MIT 8 years ago in software engineering, you actually don't have the skill to program machine learning type of technologies, right? So you've got to empower a 25 or 26-year-old to actually lead a team of people who are in their 40s.
Thank you. For the youngest person on this panel, I totally support that message.
You're the youngest person on the panel.
I hope so.
Excuse me.
I hope so.
This is the minister.
We'll have that discussion over drink, I promise. And with that, I think I don't want to prolong this panel too much. I don't want to be the person stuck between you and your evening drinks, but I still want to give the panelists the last chance. If you want to offer the audience any major takeaway from today's discussion, anyone, you don't have to, but if you have a word for the audience for today, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm a strong believer of technologies. And technologies are, we will see pretty much in the middle of the 2020s. That's, you're going to use quantum technology, quantum computing, quantum communications, quantum biologies. That's going to change the whole world. So there'll be this continuous disruptions that really coming. So all the corporate managers, corporate executives, you really have to be technically savvy in a sense.
Well, with that, I would like to thank everyone sitting on today's panel as well as everyone in the audience. Thank you very much. This is the end of this discussion.